Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last installment of the Reproductive Justice Miniseries, a two-part event meant to raise awareness surrounding reproductive justice, provide education, and foster a dialogue on the significant toll overturning Roe versus Wade takes broadly, but especially on historically oppressed communities. My name is Dr. Amanda Beardsley. I'm the Assistant Director of the Women's Resource Center, and I'm joined here by Aaliyah Chambers, who's the Assistant Director of the Black Resource Center. We started this series in response to the Roe versus Wade ruling, which removed constitutional protection for access to abortion and will have a domino effect on rights related to privacy and non-discrimination, to name a few. In particular, we were concerned with how to best support our students, many of whom were struggling when we were also feeling the visceral blow of how our bodily autonomy seemed to be up for question in a larger political climate. We needed a blueprint for moving forward, and we know that our BIPOC communities have generally led the way. And as Dr. Kamala Price explained in our panel yesterday, have not received much credit in leading the way, especially when laws haven't always extended protective measures equitably for those communities. So we want to honor their strategies and approaches as a means of workshopping and collective action in this mini-series. And keep in mind that since we are engaging with some sensitive topics tonight, this evening, we want to give a content warning.
Thank you for setting the stage, Amanda, and for the warm introduction. Good evening, everyone. We're honored to welcome tonight's speaker, Loretta Ross. Ross is a human rights activist and co-founder of Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Her talk tonight will be followed by a Q&A session. Please feel free to jot your questions in the private chat box. We will selectively read the questions for Loretta Ross in this Q&A. We also want to inform you that tonight's event is being recorded. Today's event came to fruition through the labor and support of several individuals encompassing various campus partners across SDSU. A special thank you to the Center for Intercultural Relations, Women's Resource Center, Women's Studies Department, Latinx Resource Center, Native Resource Center, and Black Resource Center. We also would like to thank the Division of Student Affairs and Campus Diversity, 1 SDSU, the College of Arts and Letters Dean's Office for providing funding for tonight's event. A special thank you to the Zoom tech team, Celeste Bonang, Ingram Awes, and Eric Escada, and Chris Tashima for tonight's technological support to ensure this event is a success. We would encourage you to stay engaged and connected throughout tonight's event. We welcome you to sign up for our respective newsletters, as well as follow us via social media for more information about upcoming program and events.
Today, we'll be joined with Elsbeth Islas, Director of the Women's Resource Center, who will lead us in the Kumeyaay Land Acknowledgement. Thank you, Elsbeth, for being here.
Good evening. We stand upon a land that carries the footsteps of millennia of Kumeyaay people. They are a people whose traditional lifeways intertwine with a worldview of earth and sky in a community of living beings. This land is part of a relationship that has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced the Kumeyaay people to the present day. It is part of a worldview founded in the harmony of the cycles of the sky and balance in the forces of life. For the Kumeyaay, red and black represent the balance of those forces that provide for harmony within our bodies, as well as the world around us. As students, faculty, staff, and alumni of San Diego State University, we acknowledge this legacy from the Kumeyaay. We promote this balance in life as we pursue our goals of knowledge and understanding. We find inspiration in the Kumeyaay spirit to open our minds and hearts. It is the legacy of the red and black. It is the land of the Kumeyaay. Yehan, my heart is good.
Awesome, thank you, Elspeth. It is my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. Loretta Ross is an award-winning, nationally recognized expert on racism and racial justice, women's rights, and reproductive rights. Her work emphasizes the intersectionality of social justice issues and how intersectionality can fuel transformation. Ross is an associate professor at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, in the program for the study of women and gender, teaching courses on white supremacy, race and culture in America, human rights, and calling in the calling out culture. She has co-written 3 books on reproductive justice. Her first book is titled Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organized for Reproductive Justice, winner of the Outstanding Award for the Gustavus Myers Center of the Study of Bigotry and Human Rights. Ross wrote another book titled Reproductive Justice, an Introduction, which is a first of its kind primer that provides a comprehensive yet succinct description of the field and puts the lives and lived experience of women of color at the center of the book. And finally, her book, Radical Reproductive Justice, Foundations, Theory, Practice, Critique. Her current book, Calling in the Calling Out Culture, is forthcoming. She was a co-founder and a national coordinator from 2005 to 2012 of the Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, a network of women of color and allied organizations that organize women of color in the reproductive justice movement. Ross is a rape survivor, was forced to raise a child born of incest, and is a survivor of sterilization abuse. She is a model of how to survive and thrive despite the traumas that disproportionately impact and affect low-income women of color. She is a nationally recognized trainer on transformative power of reproductive justice to build a human rights movement that involves everyone. She is a graduate of Agnes Scott College and holds honorary doctorate of civil law degree awarded in 2003 from Arcadia University, and a second honorary doctorate degree awarded from Smith College in 2013. She is pursuing a PhD in women's studies at Emory University in Atlanta, and she is also a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. We also just learned that Ross was awarded the Math Author Fellow Award last week. Please join me in welcoming Loretta Ross.
Sound on. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. My internet keeps being very interrupted. I'm sorry. I'm in rural New Hampshire trying to keep up. So if I freeze, just give me a couple of seconds and it probably will come on. It's certainly an honor to talk to you about reproductive justice. I was lucky enough to be one of 12 Black women who created this framework in 1994. And at the time we created it, we had no idea that it would have such a transformative impact on reproductive politics in America. So let me tell you a little bit about why we created it and what it means and what we think it should be used to achieve. In June of 1994, I was one of 12 Black women who attended a conference in Chicago organized by the Illinois Pro-Choice Alliance and the Ms. Foundation. And the Ms. Foundation had given me a scholarship to go to this conference. At the conference, we heard this presentation by the Clinton administration, President Clinton administration, on healthcare reform. And the Democrats, which were very centrist at the time, somehow thought if they omitted reproductive health care from healthcare reform, they would lessen Republican opposition to the plan. Well, how well do y'all think that worked? Not at all. But that wasn't even our point as 12 Black women, because our critique was, why would you come to a feminist conference, omit reproductive health care from your healthcare plan, and expect feminists to support that? Because going to the doctor for reproductive health care is the main reason women first go to the doctor. I mean, so why would you present such a male-centric plan to a women's conference and say, wow, get on board with us? And it didn't make sense to us. So we met in one of our rooms. I think it was the room of Mabel Thomas, but we don't have any records of who it was. But we met in Mabel's room. I'm going to go with Mabel. And Mabel said, we need to do a statement in response to this. As we were talking, we analyzed that we were dissatisfied with both the pro-choice and the pro-life movement because they were stuck in this ridiculous binary debating abortion politics, when in fact, if you start with the pregnancy, you're starting at the wrong place. Because it's what's going on in the person's life before they know they're pregnant that you have to consider when you come to dealing with an unplanned pregnancy. If a person has good answers, they're probably going to turn an unplanned pregnancy into a baby. But if they have bad answers to their life questions, they're going to turn an unplanned pregnancy into an abortion if they can. So the kind of questions you need to ask is, does she have housing? Does she have a bedroom to put this child in? Can she stay in school? Can she keep her job? Will her partner beat her if she tells him she's pregnant? All of these are human rights issues that neither the pro-choice nor the pro-life community dealt with because they only focused on the pregnancy, not what went on in that person's life before the pregnancy. And so in that way, we analyzed that abortion was always isolated from human rights and social justice issues. So we spliced together the concept of reproductive rights and social justice, smashed them together, and created the term reproductive justice as a way of embedding people's decisions about continuing pregnancies in the context of human rights and social justice. We went on then to define reproductive justice as having three basic cornerstone tenets. The first one is that we joined with the pro-choice movement in fighting for the right not to have children. And so that means the right to use birth control or abortion or abstinence if you can hang on. I mean, it's a good theory. Anyway, that's where our agenda overlaps with the pro-choice movement. But it also overlaps with the pro-life movement because the second tenet is the right to have the children that you want to have. And that means to also have them under the conditions under which you want to have them, which involves using a midwife or a doula if you want, or having your birth plan respected when you go to the hospital, to avoid unnecessary cesarean sections being imposed upon you, etc. And then the third tenet of reproductive justice is probably the most expansive, the most capacious, because it involves the right to raise your children in safe and healthy environments. And neither the pro-choice nor the pro-life movement spent enough time talking about what happens to the baby once they're here. Again, we as Black women knew that our babies are having to deal with bad schools, gun violence, school to prison pipeline, environmental problems, tax policies that underfund schools in the Black community, on and on and on. And so once we created the concept of reproductive justice, we premiered it with the full page ad in the Washington Post admonishing the Clinton administration for their short-sightedness in trying to do healthcare reform without reproductive health care. And then the concept lay dormant for 3 years until the sister song Women of Color Reproductive Health Collective was created in 1997. And then Sister Song, being the 5th attempt to organize a national coalition of women of color working on these issues, decided to use reproductive justice as our central organizing framework. And that proved to be extremely popular. At our first national conference, over 600 women of color came together when we were expecting 200 and told us that, hell yeah, we like reproductive justice. And so from that, it just took off. What we did not expect was for reproductive justice to end up supplanting the pro-choice, pro-life framework. Because we didn't create it for that, actually. We were centering ourselves as Black women in the lens and talking about what we needed from healthcare reform. If we had designed it to challenge the pro-choice, pro-life framework, then we would have had to center white women in the lens in order to problematize what they were doing. So it's a mistake to say that we created the reproductive justice framework as a challenge to white women. I understand how white women always want to center everything on themselves, but this was not about them at that time. The other thing that people get wrong about reproductive justice is that they think it's a race-based framework. And in fact, just because it was created by Black women doesn't mean it only applies to Black women. Black women are very capable of creating intersectional universal theory, and sometimes even better. I mean, have y'all ever heard of the concept of intersectionality or identity politics? And now reproductive justice? These are universal theoretical concepts created by Black women that have transformed movements, that have built new movements. And so reproductive justice is not an identity-based framework. It is a criteria-based framework. And when we created it I guess in 2006, a few years after that, maybe a decade after we created, we found so many people were using the concept incorrectly that we met as women of color and decided to put some criteria to it, that it had to be based on the human rights framework. It had to center the most vulnerable people in the lens, that it had to equally apply to everyone, that it had to connect domestic issues in the US with the global issues, so that there was not a barrier between seeing things from the perspective of the global north without looking at the cost and the damages done to the global south. We actually put together these criteria that I think recount in my books that you can read about it. I believe that reproductive justice is the answer we need today to the recent Dobbs decision restricting and overturning Roe v. Wade. Because, first of all, it's a human rights-based framework. And I do want to talk about the fullness of the human rights framework so you can see why we choose to use the human rights framework as opposed to the limits of the US Constitution. There are currently 8 categories of human rights protections to which people are entitled. And that is civil rights as the first category. That's the right to be free of discrimination, to be treated as an equal in society. And so we know about civil rights because there's been a civil rights movement fighting for justice and equality. The second category is called political human rights. These are the human rights that we mostly associate with the US Bill of Rights, like freedom of speech, freedom to vote. But we've recently learned we don't have the right to have our votes counted, according to the Supreme Court. In Gore versus Bush in 2000, they cut off the counting. They just decided that Bush was president. Enough said, right? And then there's economic human rights. That's the right to have the economy managed in such a way that it meets the needs of people. Right now, our economy is managed in such a way that it meets the needs of Wall Street. We can bail out banks, but we can't bail out Main Street, kind of thing. The right to a living wage is an economic human right. These are rights that unions fight, for example. And then there are social human rights. These are your human rights that are born out of your human needs. So when you think about what is necessary to live a life of dignity, you may want to think about food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education, and support when you can't provide those things for yourself. So that welfare is actually a human right. Social Security is actually a human right. Disability payments are your human rights. They are not, quote, options. They are obligations by the government to you to take care of you if you can't take care of yourself. The fifth category is called cultural human rights. These are the rights to practice the culture of your choice. And so, for example, the right to speak the language of your choice. Matter of fact, every time you print a flyer in something other than English, let's say in Spanish, you're actually a human rights defender because you're supporting people's cultural human rights. Freedom of religion is a human right, but we in the women's movement also would argue that freedom from religion is also a human right, because we have the human right not to have someone else's religious views imposed upon our bodies. And I think we would be stronger if we argued that decisions like Dobbs are decisions that violate our human rights. Because why should we lose human rights simply because we're pregnant? We're not less human. So why should we lose the human right to bodily autonomy simply because we're pregnant? And the Dobbs decision says, if you become pregnant, you have less rights than that fetus. So of course, that's not right. The sixth category is called environmental human rights. These are the human rights that are invoked when you're talking about climate change or environmental justice, or the right to clean water, or the right, to deal with, the fact that Pakistan, a third of Pakistan is underwater, or the right to ensure that you don't have genetically modified foods imposed upon you, those kinds of things. The seventh category is called developmental human rights. And these are the human rights that people in countries with natural resources are demanding to develop their own natural resources and not have the US military come over there to create the conditions for US corporations to come steal their gold, diamond, oil, or whatever it is. And I think developmental human rights is the most important category of human rights we don't know anything about, because we can never explain how our oil keeps getting under other people's sand. And so we would go to war to take somebody else's oil, right? Because God just made a big geological boo-boo, I guess, that our military has to correct. The eighth category are human rights demanded by the women's movement, and that's sexual human rights. That's the right to determine if and when we'll have sex, if and when we marry, if and when we'll have children, and the right to sexual pleasure, which is my favorite. But anyway, and this category of human rights became so popular that quickly the LGBTQ movement started talking about defining itself as a sexual rights movement. But I do have a fundamental problem with that. And my problem with that is that I don't want the queer rights movement confining itself to one category of human rights, the same way the African American movement confined itself to only civil rights. We should demand all of our human rights, not just one category of them. Now, those are the current categories as they're constituted. But I think there are emerging categories of human rights that we need to be aware of. I think the 9th category is going to be called digital human rights, because if we are not digitally connected, it's quickly clear that you're going to be a second-class citizen because you will not be able to get education, healthcare, or banking, for example, if you're not digitally connected. It may be the 10th category ends up being the right to participate in space travel so that people beyond boy billionaires can actually access and benefits from these scientific developments. And so when you understand the fullness of the human rights framework and how universal, interdependent, and interconnected it is, you see why that's a very sturdy foundation on which to rest reproductive justice. And we can argue how the Dobbs decision was such a violent overturning of our, not only the Roe decision, but what was a violation of women's human rights and the human rights of anybody capable of being pregnant, recognizing that not only women can get pregnant. And so reproductive justice, I believe, answers one of the key questions about what we need to do in face of the overturning of the Dobbs decision. I believe, first of all, we're going to have to center the most vulnerable people in our lens. And so what that means is that the women who are most going to suffer from the Dobbs decision are the ones with the least resources. As a matter of fact, we have a saying in the human rights movement: those who have the least in life need the most from human rights. And so we're going to have to, of course, smuggle abortion pills to them, help transport them through an underground to friendlier states. We're going to have to literally break the law sometimes to talk to people about abortion and making sure that women don't die simply because men don't care that they are dying. And so right now there are existing feminist networks doing all of those things. But the thing that I'm most concerned about is that we've got to bring discussions on abortion out of the closet. People should stop being afraid to talk within their friends and families about abortion. We have to destigmatize it, because after all, it really just is another medical procedure. Since the creation of the reproductive justice framework, I've been far more interested in a concept that I'm calling reproductive futurism. And reproductive futurism is when you take the Black feminist theory of reproductive justice and you really examine reproductive science and technology, and you prioritize Black women's reproductive experiences as a lens to examine the overpromise of techno-utopianism and to resist techno-eugenics. Eugenics, of course, is the false science that you can breed better human beings. And I think there's many reasons we need to be skeptical of this whole overhyped futurism that they're talking about. I mean, you can just look at how things get hyped and become very dangerous, like cryptocurrencies or the metaverse, trying to persuade us not to deal with reality how miserable these corporations and the military are making the world, but escape, through virtual reality and all that kind of stuff. I think they're overpromising with artificial intelligence. There's a lot of discrimination and racism in the algorithms that they use in all of our social media spaces. Again, I want to talk about why space travel should be limited from billionaires. We're already dealing with genetically modified food, but we're also facing the risk of people trying to permanently alter the human genome. And we've shown ourselves incapable of dealing with emerging pandemics like COVID, and others are going to come. And then there's a lot of climate denial happening that people don't want to admit that climate change is happening. Matter of fact, people don't even want to admit that they believe in science anymore until they get sick and go to the hospital. And so we really need to be careful of how people in science are overpromising a techno-utopian future. But my concern is that this emerging technology will be used to upgrade pre-existing social inequalities. Because right now, even as artificial intelligence is transforming biotechnology from assisted reproduction and genomics, these developments may prove promising, but the lack of regulation and the financial conflicts of interest threaten to really worsen our social problems as opposed to solve them. Because obviously, when you think of the concept of designer babies, do you really expect them to want Black and brown designer babies? I don't think so, because they are busily killing the ones that we have. And so we have to use reproductive justice and reproductive futurism to counter the myths of overpopulation, where people think that the wrong people are having too many children, and so they want to discourage the wrong people from having kids, while they encourage force breeding, particularly on white women, to have more kids because of this fears of this white replacement theory that you hear Tucker Carlson talking about. And so when you think about reproductive technologies and reproductive futurism, it's very important to use the human rights-based values of reproductive justice to not only examine these issues, but offer a strong critique of how they neglect to address the pre-existing social inequalities of our society. And so that has been something that has preoccupied me for a long, long time since the creation of reproductive justice. We've also got to talk about other issues within reproductive justice, like trans justice, disability justice, and, all of these other issues that really need to be considered within a reproductive futurist framework. And so it's very important for us to recognize that there's a risk that our children will suffer in the future because of what we're doing now. When we privilege biogenetic relations while not critiquing the concept of biological determinism, which is a white supremacist concept, that we're not addressing the different longevity between men and women and really addressing these inequities that produce and how this is having an effect on gender equality. That technology can and will be used to upgrade pre-existing structural inequalities, and we need to examine who will benefit or who will be excluded from these scientific advancements and why will that happen. And for infertility issues, will there be government-funded public surrogacy language, or it's going to be an open market where anybody with the cash is free to exploit vulnerable women as surrogates to have babies for them? And we really need to ask, are we okay with worshiping on the altar of genetic replication of ourselves And is that in fact good for our future? Because if you claim there is a human right to a child, what does that actually mean? And of course, we need to examine how climate change will affect people's reproductive decision making and other environmental vulnerabilities so that we are clear of the challenges lying in the future that we need to look at, like I thought. I want to close. Sorry, my nose is trying to get a little stuffy. I want to close with a quote from the Saheli Women's Resource Center in India. The final goal of reproductive engineering appears to be the manufacture of a human being to suit exact specification of physical attributes, class, caste, color, and sex. Who will decide these specifications? We have already seen how sex determination has resulted in the elimination of female fetuses. The powerless in any society will get more disempowered with the growth of such reproductive technology. And then, even if you think we're being alarmist, the proponents of eugenics through reproductive technology say, and this is Professor Lee Silver from Princeton University, the economy, the media, the entertainment industry, and the knowledge industry will be controlled by members of what they call the gene-rich class, people who have had their genes altered for improvement. Naturals, people who are not altered, will work as low-paid service providers or as laborers. Eventually, the gene-rich class and the natural class will become entirely separate species with no ability to crossbreed and with as much romantic interest in each other as a current human would have for a chimpanzee. So this is a very scary vision for the future because, again, many people, this is Professor Gregory Pence, who wrote a book called Who's Afraid of Human Cloning in 1998. Many people love their retrievers and their sunny dispositions around children and adults. Could people be chosen in the same way? Would it be so terrible to allow parents to at least aim for a certain type of child in the same way that great breeders try to match a breed of dogs to the needs of a family? So we need to look at the implications of these new reproductive technologies, who is choosing and at what cost to women and societies. What will be the particular impact of these new technologies on women of color, on trans people, on low-income people, and our overall ability to control our reproductive decisions and experiences. So I'm going to stop there. I'm getting a cold and I'm losing my voice. So I want to save maximum time for Q&A. And thank y'all for listening to me.
Awesome, and thank you. Yeah, thank you just for being able to like share a whole lot about the reproductive justice movement from the start and then all the way into like implications, like you said, that'll affect today too. And so really, I had a few questions and folks will also have an opportunity, like I said a little earlier, to put them in the chat. So I'll ask you a few, we'll give folks a chance to ask you a few, and then kind of going into a little bit of what you talked about as well too. And so you really mentioned like reducing the stigma on abortion. And, you know, so I wanted to ask you, like, if you could speak a little bit more about like, in order to reduce the stigma, like, you know, a lot of the times it's thought about like, oh, this is just irresponsible, you know, someone was being irresponsible. So I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit more about what are the rich diversities and circumstances for those who are seeking like that medical attention or procedure.
Well, the reasons people need abortions are as varied as the people. I mean, first of all, 3 out of 4 women who seek abortions already have children. So they're already actively parenting. They know that reality. So they're making a conscious decision not to increase their family size because they already know what they're coping with. And if you're not walking in their shoes, how can you second guess their decisions? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Also, there's a lot of contraceptive sabotage and failure out there. I mean, I know people who report that their partners poked holes in their condoms as a way of getting them pregnant, or substituted aspirin for birth control pills as a way of getting them pregnant. And so you never actually know what's going on in a person's life. But the misogyny of our society basically says that if a woman is dealing with an unintended pregnancy, first, she's a slut. Secondly, she should have prevented it. And third, she should be punished for that by having a baby. And neither of those things are right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And that kind of brings me to my next question, how you talked about like human rights and even today with the Roe v. Wade, like you said, the Dobbs decision. So can you talk a little bit more about how politics have like impacted healthcare decisions? Like, of course, now and in the past, and I know you kind of covered this a bit, but like, do you believe based on today, what we see today, that we'll begin to, or, you know, at some point lean on like medical professionals and patterns that we see, or like other implications as opposed to politics? So can you talk about political influence on the reproductive justice movement?
Well, let's be clear. The modern Republican opposition to abortion only began in the 1970s. And it wasn't so much in response to Roe v. Wade. It was because when Ronald Reagan decided to run for president, he decided that he was going to build a coalition between the people who were still mad at integration, the segregationists, to which he brought together the Catholic Church, who was opposed to abortion, and the nativist folks, which were opposed to immigrants, and the family vote that were opposed to LGBT rights, and the pro-war vote, people who were still supporting the Vietnam War, or mad that we didn't win the Vietnam War, to be more specific. And so he put together this unholy alliance. And in doing so, a lot of Republicans reversed their stance, because even Richard Nixon, the president, previous to that, supported abortion rights. He's the one that funded family planning clinics all across the country. Because when family planning was pitched as a way to contain the growth of brown and black communities, the Republicans loved it. It was only when white women started using the services that they got alarmed and stuff. When it was pitched as a race issue, no problem. When it's pitched as a women's issue, all the problems in the world. Because one of the things that I critique about the women's movement is that if you don't understand white supremacy, you don't understand reproductive politics. Because depending on how you are racialized in society will determine what your projected or desired reproductive destiny is. And all the restrictions on birth control, abortion, and sex education are designed to increase white birth rates. They don't want more brown and black babies. Nothing they've ever done convinced me that they want more brown and black babies. I think it's about increasing white babies. And so if you don't have an astute, racialized analysis of reproductive politics, you really don't know what's going on. And I also would argue, though it's more controversial to say so, that because this is directed at forcing white women to have more babies, that it's actually quite appropriate for white women to be leading the struggle in the white community. Because the reality is that America is not divided like the media say. White people are divided. And it's white people that need to struggle in those white communities. Have those uncomfortable conversations with Uncle Frank and Daddy Tom and whoever else the hell you need to talk to about whether or not they really believe that women have the same human rights as they do, and do they believe in democracy anymore. So I think it's totally appropriate that white women need to struggle in their white communities.
Mm. And can you talk a little bit about, now that you bring that up, like I know even like your forthcoming book about, cancel culture. And so can you talk about like, how the cancel culture has like impacted like, advocacy work for human rights? And then like how can we move to like calling people in, when they're having some of these difficult conversations?
I am often asked whether I have hope for the future. And I actually do have a lot, because I think the people who are opposed to human rights mistakenly think that they're fighting us, but I actually think they're fighting forces way beyond their power to control, because they're fighting truth, they're fighting evidence, they're fighting history, and they're fighting time. I don't care how angry those white men are. You cannot defeat truth, evidence, time, and history. You don't have that power. Matter of fact, your pimples on the ass of time as it is. You're demographically doomed. But my biggest worry is that we will snatch defeat from the jaws of victory through our call out culture. That we will cannibalize each other with the call out culture and then provide a pathway for the anti-human rights movement to win. And so that's why I spent the last 6 or 7 years talking about how we can create a call in culture on the left, because we need each other. We have to stop micro dividing and fighting over stuff that really should not divide us. Because let me talk about my own theory of change. I believe that most of us on this call, for example, are what I call 90%ers. And we're 90%ers not because we're that represents our size in the population, but instead it represents a high degree of intellectual unity that we have. And I call that intellectual unity when we can use words like heteropatriarchy and understand what we mean by that, or neoliberal capitalism, or transphobia. We are intelligible to each other. Our problem as 90%ers is that we've put entirely too much pressure on each other to become 100%ers, under the mistaken belief that if we don't perfectly align with each other, one of us must be doing something wrong. And yet, that is not real, and it ain't even necessary. Because when many different people think many different thoughts and they move in the same direction, that's a human rights movement. But when many different people think one thought and they move in the same direction, that's a cult. And we are not building the human rights cult. We're building the movement. Now, within my theory of change, outside of that 90% bubble, is the people who are what I call 75%ers. These are the people who do not use that in-group 90% language like heteropatriarchy or cisgender or whatever, but they share our values. So as a feminist, I would consider the Girl Scouts my allies, because they believe in girls and women's empowerment, right? Even if they're never going to lead a troop to defend an abortion clinic, like I wish they would, right? But they still are my allies. I call them 75%ers because they will never use that 90% language. As a matter of fact, they're repelled by it because it doesn't make sense to them in many ways. Outside of the 75%ers or the 50%ers, these are the people who go to the left or the right, depending on who they last talked to, like my parents. My dad was a Jamaican immigrant, hyper patriotic, in the Army for 26 years. Weapons specialist, Uncle Sam could do no wrong as far as my dad was concerned. My mother was a Christian woman, Southern Evangelical Baptist, and she believed birth control was a Bible held firmly between my knees, figuratively and literally. So they could go to the right, depending on if they talk to the military or their preacher. or they could go to the left because they were Democrats, Black Democrats. And so they did believe in equality and justice and that kind of stuff. So one day my mom was on the phone bragging about her kids. I'm one of 8. And she was saying, well, I have one son who's an architect, and I have another son who's a pharmacist. And Loretta just doesn't go to jail too often, you know, because my mother mistakenly believed that if you're a human rights activist, you shared the fate with Dr. King. You were going to go to jail, you were going to get assassinated. She did not realize that I had never been to jail in my life, you know, but the fact that I was out here protesting meant that I must be at risk of jail. And so when Mom got off the phone, I reminded her that she had started a Girl Scout troop for Black girls in the 60s because we weren't allowed to join the white Girl Scout troops down in Texas at the time. And she made us every weekend prepare food for homeless people in the neighborhood as a way to earn our badges. And when I reminded her of that, I said, Mom, do you remember this? And she said, yeah, I remember that. I said, well, you thought it was so important for us to learn how to feed hungry people. Mom, as a human rights activist, I asked why they're hungry in the first place. So I'm living out your values just in a different way. So with those 50%ers, you can always go underneath their words and speak to their values and build a lot of common ground. And so that's who I'm talking about calling in, the 50%ers, the 75%ers, and the 90%ers, because they're all allies or potential allies. Outside of the 50%ers are the 25%ers. These are the people with whom we have so little overlap in worldview that it's going to be impossible to have a conversation with them in most instances, because they're going to be arguing that the election was stolen from Trump, or that the doctors are lying about COVID, or that children shouldn't be getting vaccinated. I mean, they're going to be running QAnon crazy stuff at you. And so those are not the people I'm seeking to work with. Those are the people I'm seeking to work around by amassing the power of the 50s, the 75s, and the 90s. And then outside of the 25s are the zeros. These are the people who are openly proud of being associated with the white supremacist neo-fascist movement. There is no hope in hell of changing their minds because they find discrimination, prejudice profitable. And they ain't never, ever gonna give up their ability to earn money by the rank exploitation of other human beings. I love it when white people keep saying, well, when Black folks gonna get over slavery? And I keep saying, well, when white folks get over losing their damn slaves, because y'all keep acting like y'all are pissed off that we aren't still enslaved. No. So anyway, that's my theory of change. And so that allows me to be strategic about who I choose to call in and why, as opposed to who I'm calling out. So for example, a 50% or a 75%er is the kind of person, white person, who puts up a Black Lives Matter sign, and then they get deeply criticized because, quote, they're not doing enough for the anti-racist movement. And I challenge that critique of them, because just by them putting up that Black Lives Matter sign, you already know the number one thing you ever need to know about a white person. They're not on the other side. They're not on the dark side. Because ain't no Klansman ever put up a Black Lives Matter sign. Ain't no militia member ever put up a Black Lives Matter sign. Ain't no Proud Boys, ain't no Boogaloo Boys. You see what I'm saying? So just by them putting up their sign, they signalize that there's a potential ally for you. So you need to get over your woke arrogance and figure out how to work with them.
Thank you for that too, because and I appreciate you being able to share about the theory of change, your theory of change, and how important it is to, like you said, be able to understand who are your allies, and then also who are the people that you have to work around too. So I really appreciate that. And you talked a little bit about this too, and when you spoke about your mother. And so I wanted to ask you a bit if you wanted to like further explain your personal connection to like reproductive justice, like in your own journey, and then also how it's impacted the journeys of like other women of color too. And particularly, I'm interested even with Black women as well.
Well, my own reproductive justice journey began through childhood sexual abuse. I was raped when I was 11 years old at a Girl Scout outing, kidnapped from a Girl Scout outing. So that's how I lost my virginity. At age 14, my mother thought she could keep me safe by having an older cousin babysit me. It turned out that he was married, 27, and thought it would be a better idea to get me drunk so he could have sex with me. And at 14, I thought I was being treated like a grown-up woman, so I didn't even know to define it as rape at the time because, somebody was adultifying me. I was being groomed, in other words. And so I became pregnant because of that in 1968. And at the time, abortion was not an option. So I had no choice to have the baby. The only choice I had was whether to give the baby up for adoption or not, or keep him. And I gave birth at a hospital in San Antonio that was run by the Catholics. And I'm convinced that they were supposed to whisk my son away to adoption agencies. I'd already pre-signed the forms for him to be given up for adoption. But instead, they brought him to me the day after he was born. And I looked down and he had my face. And I kept saying, he's got my face. He's got my face. Oh, he's got my face, right? And in that moment, I went from being a scared teenager to a mama. I mean, it was just, that was not how I had planned on becoming a mother. Trust me. With my rapist cousin, that was not at all the plan. And so that happened at 15, because I was 15 by the time my son was born. At 16, I went to college. I went to Howard University on scholarship, became pregnant there, but at least the sex was voluntary with my first boyfriend in college. He was a first-year law student when I was a first-year undergrad. And fortunately for me, DC legalized abortion 3 years before Roe v. Wade. They legalized abortion in the summer of 1970, and I needed an abortion in the fall of 1970. So I was able to go to the Washington Hospital Center and have a perfectly legal abortion. So my problem wasn't legal, nor was my problem financial. So my law school buddy was more than willing to pay for it. The problem was familial. My mother wouldn't sign the permission slip because she thought I should just drop out of school, deal with this pregnancy, come back home, finish raising the kid I already had that she was taking care of, and just become a mama, because that's what she thought was the pinnacle of life, to become a housewife, get a husband, that kind of thing. And so I didn't like that future for myself. And so my big sister, Carol, who's 9 years older than me, forged my mother's signature onto the permission slip. She was in Texas, I was in DC. And that's how I had an abortion, trying to prevent other unintended pregnancies. Because the other thing, my mother wouldn't give me permission to access birth control. I was only 16, so I needed parental consent to get birth control, which is how I got pregnant anyway. So then, fortunately, Howard University was offering the Dalcon Shield, an IUD. And so when I turned 18, I accepted implantation of the Dalcon Shield, which was a mistake because years later it led to inflammation of my fallopian tubes, a coma, and a sterilization by the time I was 23 years old. So I had a full-term birth, an abortion, and a sterilization. And that was my entire reproductive career. And so I became very passionate about trying to keep what happened to me to happening to other young Black women. The sexual violence, the childhood abuse, the reproductive violence, all of that should not have happened to me. And I work hard to make sure it doesn't happen to other people.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story too. And so I know you spoke a lot about, like you said, just your personal connection would have been, I guess, like you said, being able to pay it forward would have been like some wins for you, like along the way that you're like, wow, like this is affirming. I'm glad that, you know, like you said, of course, through that self-passion, but, you know, even like that impact, like would have been some, like, I guess, memorable moments for yourself or joys that have come up along the journey.
This has to be the last question because my computer is dying and I don't have my battery, my cord with me. But I will say that the entirety of my life, I've been lifted and supported by older Black women who did not give up on insufferable me. Even when I was 16 and mouthy and thought I knew everything as I was doing anti-apartheid work and anti-gentrification work, they always supported me. They always believed in me, and they always forgave me for the mistakes.
Awesome. So I am assuming that Ms. Loretta Ross, that the computer died, but I really do want to thank everyone. And my apologies for not being able to get to the questions in the chat room, but we really want to thank and appreciate everyone for your time. And again, want to thank Loretta Ross for coming out tonight to tonight's event. And thank you everyone for being here. Wanted to encourage you all to please stay connected to our respective centers through our social medias, as well as our newsletters.
Yes, if you have a moment, we'd really appreciate it if folks could let us know how this mini series went. We apologize for the short and abrupt ending, but we would love to kind of hear your feedback by filling out our feedback form in the chat. And we really thank you all for being here, and we hope you have a great evening. All right, thank you all, and take care.